Kelzorak was not a creature of hesitation. Among the Dracari, a proud and war-hardened reptilian species, he was considered one of the finest bounty hunters in the galaxy. His armor was carved from the bones of ancient predators, his scales gleamed under the cold light of distant stars, and his amber eyes could pierce the darkest corners of any battlefield. When the Galactic Trade Council offered an enormous bounty for a human named Captain Elias Carter, Kale accepted without question. To the Dracari, humans were fragile creatures, short-lived, soft-skinned, and far too emotional. Taking down a single human, no matter how clever or resourceful, was hardly a challenge worth mentioning. The human had been spotted on Jura 7, a remote mining colony orbiting a dying star. The planet was a wasteland. Dust storms raged endlessly across the surface, and crumbling mining equipment lay scattered like broken bones. Kale descended from his ship, the Black Talon, with practiced calmness. His boots sank slightly into the dusty soil as he activated his tracker. Target detected. Sector Gamma 4. Distance 1.2 kilometers. Kale's sharp claws flexed against the grip of his plasma rifle. The hunt was on. Captain Elias Carter crouched low inside a hollowed-out mining vehicle, his chest rising and falling with rapid breaths. His dark brown hair was matted with sweat and dirt, and a bruise colored the side of his cheek. He gripped a small, outdated blaster tightly in his trembling hands. Through a small crack in the metal, he could see the towering figure of Kelzorak moving with unnatural grace across the desolate terrain. The bounty hunter was scanning the surroundings with sharp, predatory focus, his rifle gleaming under the pale sunlight. "They sent him after me," Elias muttered to himself. Kale was a legend. Entire crews had disappeared after crossing paths with him. Elias knew running wouldn't work, not against someone like Kale, but if he could buy himself a little time. Just enough to reach the data core hidden in the mining outpost. Elias closed his eyes for a moment and steadied his breathing. "Focus, Carter. One step at a time." Cal's tracker beeped softly as he closed the distance to his target. His amber eyes narrowed as he caught faint heat signatures nearby. Humans had a tendency to hide, but they weren't as good at it as they thought. He aimed his rifle at a pile of abandoned mining crates. "Come out, human." Cal's deep voice reverberated through the dusty air. "Hiding will not save you." There was silence. Then, a sudden flash. A single blaster shot streaked through the air, narrowly missing Cal's head. Kale growled and lunged forward, his heavy boots crushing the crates as he advanced. Elias bolted from his hiding spot, running as fast as his legs could carry him. He was heading straight for the mining facility. The bounty hunter raised his rifle, locking onto the fleeing figure. But then something made him hesitate. Elias wasn't running in a blind panic. His movements were deliberate, purposeful. "This human is not fleeing," Kale muttered to himself. "He's heading somewhere." Curious, Kale lowered his weapon slightly and began pursuing on foot. His long strides closed the distance quickly, but Elias reached the mining facility first. The human disappeared through a rusted metal doorway, and the automatic lock slammed shut behind him. Inside the dimly lit control room, Elias worked quickly, his fingers dancing across the cracked console keyboard. Warning lights blinked angrily, and dust floated in the stale air. The data core was almost ready to upload, but time was slipping away. A heavy crash echoed from the far end of the room. The reinforced metal door bent inward under an immense force. Kale was coming. Elias clenched his jaw and activated the final command on the console. A small holographic disc ejected from the machine, glowing faintly blue. It contained the coordinates to something far bigger than himself, something that could change the fate of not just humanity, but the entire galaxy. The door finally gave way, crashing to the floor in a cloud of dust and sparks. Kale stepped through the debris, his rifle aimed directly at Elias' chest. "You have nowhere left to run, human." Elias slowly raised his hands, the glowing data disk held between two fingers. If you shoot me, you'll never know what this is. Cale paused, his rifle steady, but his eyes sharp with curiosity. Explain. Elias took a shaky breath. It's a key to a weapon. A weapon powerful enough to destroy entire planets. But it's not meant for humanity. It's meant for your people, Cale. The Dracari are in danger. For a long moment, silence filled the air. Cale's rifle remained raised, but the cold certainty in his eyes began to waver. You expect me to believe this? Cale growled. Elias met the alien's piercing gaze. I don't expect you to believe me. But if I'm right, and you kill me now, your people won't stand a chance. Cale hesitated, his claws flexing around the weapon. The decision before him was clear. Complete the contract and collect his bounty, or lower his weapon and listen to the desperate human before him. Against every instinct in his hunter's heart, Cale slowly lowered his rifle. Speak, human, he said, but choose your words carefully. And for the first time, Elias allowed himself to hope. To be continued. Cale's Orcs' amber eyes locked onto Elias Carter as if scanning his very soul. The bounty hunter's plasma rifle remained lowered, but his massive clawed fingers hovered near the trigger. The air inside the dusty mining control room felt heavy, filled with the hum of flickering lights and distant echoes of machinery. Start talking, human, Cale growled, his deep voice reverberating through the narrow metal walls. Elias took a cautious step back, clutching the glowing data disk in his trembling hand. His face was smeared with dirt, and exhaustion clung to his every movement. But his voice was steady. There's a faction, Cale. They call themselves the Void Accord. They aren't just pirates or warlords. They're something far worse. They've found a superweapon. Something ancient. Something powerful enough to turn entire star systems into ashes. Cale's reptilian brow furrowed slightly. His sharp teeth glimmered under the faint light as he spoke. And you expect me to believe that they're targeting my people? Elias nodded. They don't care about species or alliances. They care about power. They see your kind, the Dracari, as a threat to their plans. And humanity, we're just collateral damage. The bounty hunter remained silent, processing the information. Cale had faced liars, traitors, and desperate prey before. He could smell fear. He could taste deception. But this human, this Elias Carter, there was no lie in his voice, no cowardice in his eyes. If you're telling the truth, Cale said slowly, his voice softer now, but still sharp, why would you risk your life running from me instead of handing this over to your own people? Elias hesitated, his eyes dropping to the data disk. Because humanity's leadership is compromised. The Accord has spies everywhere. I can't trust anyone. But for some reason, I feel like I can trust you. The silence stretched between them like a tightrope. Cale let out a low, rumbling sigh before finally holstering his rifle across his back. Very well, human, I will listen. But if you betray me, his claws flexed dangerously. Your end will be swift. Elias let out a shaky breath, relief flooding his face. Fair enough. The two unlikely allies moved swiftly through the abandoned mining colony, heading toward Cale's ship, the Black Talon. The storm outside had grown fierce, with orange dust swirling across the cracked landscape. Elias struggled to keep up with Cale's long strides, his boots sinking into the loose dirt with every step. Tell me more about this weapon, Cale said without turning around. Elias wiped sweat from his brow. It's not just a weapon. It's a construct. Something left behind by an ancient species long before any of us existed. It's powered by something called the Void Shard. A piece of, I don't know, pure energy. Technology. It's beyond anything we can understand. Cale's sharp eyes scanned the horizon as he listened. And you have the coordinates. Elias tapped the data disk secured to his belt. Right here. But if we're going to stop them, we need to act fast. The Accord has a fleet on the move. If they activate that weapon, millions, maybe billions, will die. As they neared the landing site, Kel's ship came into view. The Black Talon was an imposing vessel, its sleek black hull designed for both speed and firepower. But something was wrong. The ship's boarding ramp was lowered, and faint blue lights flickered from inside. Kel stopped abruptly, raising a clawed hand to signal Elias to halt. His amber eyes narrowed as he scanned the area. "They're here," Kel growled softly. Elias' heart began to race. "The Accord." Kel nodded, unslinging his plasma rifle. "Stay low. Follow my lead." The two crept closer, using scattered debris and rocky outcroppings for cover. Through the open boarding ramp, Kel spotted several humanoid figures in sleek black armor, their helmets glowing with faint red visors. Void Accord operatives. One of them spoke into a communicator. "We've secured the ship. The target is still alive and on the surface, awaiting further orders." Kel's jaw tightened. His ship, his sanctuary, had been invaded. With practiced precision, he raised his plasma rifle, his claws steady around the trigger. "Elias," Kel whispered without looking back. "When I start firing, you run for cover and don't stop until I say." Elias nodded, gripping his outdated blaster with white knuckles. Kel exhaled slowly, then unleashed a barrage of plasma fire. The silent night erupted with blinding flashes of blue light as Kel's rifle tore through the enemy operatives. The Void Accord soldiers scrambled for cover, returning fire with red laser bolts that illuminated the dust-filled air. Elias ducked behind a metal crate, his heart pounding in his ears. He watched as Kel moved with terrifying speed and precision, his scales reflecting the flashes of combat. The bounty hunter was more than just a brute. He was a predator. One of the Accord operatives spotted Elias and aimed his rifle. Time seemed to slow as the red barrel glowed with energy. But before the shot could be fired, Kel lunged forward, his massive clawed hand smashing the soldier to the ground with brutal force. "Move, Elias," Kel roared. Elias sprinted toward the boarding ramp, narrowly avoiding stray blaster fire. Kel followed, firing one last shot before slamming the ramp control button. The metal doors sealed shut behind them. Inside the cockpit, Kel quickly activated the ship's engines. The Black Talon roared to life, lifting off the dusty surface of Jura 7 and into the chaotic sky. Elias collapsed into a seat, breathing heavily. Kel, still gripping the controls, glanced back at him. "We're not safe yet, human. The Accord won't stop chasing us." Elias nodded, his face determined despite his exhaustion. "Then we don't stop running until we stop them." For the first time, Kel felt something strange, a flicker of respect for the fragile human beside him. The hunt was over, but the real fight had just begun. To be continued. The Black Talon soared through the cold void of space, stars streaking past the reinforced glass of the cockpit. Kel Zorek's clawed hands gripped the control panel, his amber eyes scanning the sensor display for any sign of pursuit. Behind him, Captain Elias Carter sat slumped in the co-pilot's seat, his face pale under the faint glow of emergency lights. "They won't stop, will they?" Elias asked, his voice hoarse. Kel's reptilian jaw tightened. "No. The Void Accord does not forgive failure. They'll hunt us until one of us is dead." Elias exhaled slowly, his hand drifting to the small data disk clipped to his belt. It felt impossibly heavy now, a tiny object carrying the weight of countless lives. "We can't run forever," Elias said, glancing at Kel. "We need a plan." Kel's eyes shifted to the human for a moment before returning to the controls. "We're heading to Outpost 17, a neutral station in the Vega Expanse. It's a shadow port. Mercenaries, traders, smugglers. No faction holds power there." Elias frowned. "Can we trust anyone there?" "No," Kel said bluntly. "But it's our best chance to regroup and gather supplies. You should rest, human. We'll arrive in 6 hours." Elias leaned back in his seat, his eyelids heavy. The adrenaline of the past hours was wearing off, replaced by exhaustion and the dull ache of bruises across his body. Kale, however, remained alert, his sharp eyes fixed on the stars ahead. For a moment, he glanced back at Elias and felt something unfamiliar. Respect. Pity. No, it was something deeper. Despite being fragile and short-lived, this human had shown more courage than many seasoned warriors Cal had fought beside. But respect didn't mean trust. Outpost 17 floated in the cold void like a rusted metal beehive. It was a sprawling network of interlocking docking bays, towering spires, and flickering neon lights. Ships of all shapes and sizes drifted around the station, some bearing scars from recent battles, others carrying stolen cargo in their bellies. The Black Talon docked in one of the lower bays, the automated clamps locking it into place with a metallic clunk. Kale and Elias descended the boarding ramp, stepping into the dim, crowded corridors of the outpost. The air smelled of oil, smoke, and something metallic that Elias couldn't quite place. "Stay close, human," Kale said, his deep voice low but firm. His clawed hand rested near the hilt of a curved energy blade strapped to his side. Elias nodded, his eyes darting nervously across the faces in the crowd. Alien species of every shape and size moved around them. Tall insectoids with glimmering carapaces, short furry creatures with glowing eyes, and humanoids draped in heavy cloaks. As they made their way to a back-alley cantina named the Rusted Star, Elias couldn't help but notice the way others moved out of Cal's path. The bounty hunter was feared here. His presence cast a long shadow. Inside the cantina, flickering holosigns bathed the walls in pale blue light. Alien patrons sat hunched over glowing drinks, muttering in a dozen different languages. Kale led Elias to a corner booth, where an older alien with wiry limbs and 4 glassy eyes waited. Zorak, the alien rasped, leaning forward. "I didn't expect to see you here, and with a human, no less." "Information, Zorak. That's what I need," Kale said firmly. Zorak chuckled, a sound like metal scraping against stone. "Information always comes at a price, Kale." His 4 eyes swiveled toward Elias. "And your friend here looks expensive." Elias stiffened, but Kale growled low in his throat, the sound vibrating through the booth. "You'll deal with me, Zorak. Not him." Zorak raised his thin hands in mock surrender. "Very well, very well. What do you need?" "The Void Accord, their fleet movements, and any rumors about ancient weapons." Zorak's amused expression faded, and he leaned closer. "You're swimming in deep waters, Kale. The Void Accord has been moving silently, gathering resources, building something. No one knows where or what. But there's a system, Vorta Nexus, a dead star surrounded by wreckage and debris. The Accord has been seen there, and they don't let anyone near." Elias leaned forward. "That's it. That's where they're taking the Void Shard." Kale nodded. "Coordinates, Zorak. Now." Zorak hesitated. "That information doesn't come cheap." Cal's clawed hand shot forward, grabbing Zorak's collar and pulling him closer. "I'm not in the mood for games." The alien froze, his glassy eyes wide with fear. "Fine. Fine. I'll transmit the coordinates to your ship." Kale released him, and Zorak stumbled back, muttering curses in his native tongue as he activated a small holopad. Back aboard the Black Talon, the coordinates appeared on the navigation display. The Vorta Nexus system blinked on the screen like a warning light. Elias exhaled slowly. "That's it. That's where we need to go." Kale studied the map in silence. "This mission is suicide, human. The Void Accord doesn't leave survivors." Elias met Cal's sharp amber eyes. "If we don't stop them, no one will survive." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Kale turned back to the controls and began plotting the course. "Strap in, human," he said gruffly. "We're going to war." As the Black Talon lifted off from Outpost 17 and disappeared into hyperspace, both Kale and Elias knew that whatever lay ahead would test their limits, not just as allies, but as individuals. Neither of them could afford to fail. To be continued. The Black Talon shot through hyperspace, its sleek body slicing through the void. The stars outside the windows were nothing more than streaks of light, as Cal Zorek piloted the ship with practiced ease. Beside him, Elias sat silently, his eyes fixed on the blinking coordinates that led them to the edge of known space. The Vortinexus. It had taken days to reach this point. The journey was long and perilous, but both Cale and Elias knew that the stakes were far higher than either of them had anticipated. The Void Accord's new weapon could change everything, and if they didn't stop it, entire civilizations could be wiped out. Cale glanced at Elias from the corner of his eye. The human had been quiet for most of the trip, but his determined expression hadn't wavered. Despite the fear that lingered beneath the surface, Elias carried himself with the same steady resolve that had kept him alive through countless close calls. Cale couldn't help but respect him. "You're thinking too much," Cale said suddenly, his voice cutting through the quiet hum of the ship. Elias turned his head, surprised. "What?" "The weight of it all. I can see it in your eyes," Cale replied, his amber eyes focused on the controls. "You're wondering what will happen if we fail. You're wondering if we even have a chance." Elias swallowed, feeling the truth of Cale's words. "I'm not going to lie. I thought about it. But we don't have a choice. If we don't stop them, they'll destroy everything." Cale didn't answer right away, his mind far from the conversation. He had faced danger before, in battles that would have broken weaker beings. But this time, something was different. The human had a fire in him, a will to keep fighting even when the odds were stacked against him. It was rare. "You're right," Cale finally said. "We don't have a choice." The Vortinex's system appeared on the view screen like a silent, menacing presence, a dead star orbited by a field of wreckage, asteroids, and scattered debris. It was a graveyard, an ancient reminder of long-forgotten battles. The Void Accord had made this place their home, and they weren't interested in visitors. "Prepare yourself, human," Cale warned as he guided the Black Talon into the outer reaches of the system. "We're not just dealing with the Accord soldiers. The debris field is full of hidden dangers, traps, scavengers, and who knows what else." Elias nodded, gripping the armrest of his seat tightly. "I'm ready." They passed through the debris field slowly, the ship weaving around massive chunks of metal and shattered hulls from old ships that had met their end here. The wreckage was thick, and Cale's sharp eyes never left the sensors, watching for any signs of enemy ships or hidden threats. Suddenly, a blip appeared on the radar, a faint signal. Cale's hand hovered over the controls, his claws poised to react. The signal grew stronger. It wasn't just a random scan. It was an attack. "Brace yourself," Cale barked, throwing the ship into a sharp, evasive maneuver. A burst of plasma fire erupted from the shadows, narrowly missing the Black Talon's hull. Cale swerved, narrowly avoiding a large piece of wreckage that appeared out of nowhere. The enemy ship, a sleek black vessel, pursued them relentlessly, its weapons blazing. Elias's heart raced as the ship rocked violently. "Who are they?" "More Void Accord." "No," Cale said, his voice calm and focused. "This is something worse. A scavenger ship. These ships are equipped with stolen Void Accord tech." The scavenger ship fired again, and this time, the Black Talon's shields flared in resistance. Cale quickly hit a series of buttons, activating the ship's countermeasures. The ship lurched as it released a cloud of decoy flares, confusing the enemy's targeting system. "Hold on," Cale shouted as he flipped a switch, sending the ship into a steep dive toward the surface of one of the nearby asteroids. The scavenger ship followed closely, but the asteroid's rocky surface blocked their line of fire. Cale glanced back at Elias. "Get to the weapons bay. I'll keep them distracted." Elias hesitated, his eyes wide. "Are you sure?" Cale's eyes gleamed with a hunter's focus. "Just go. I won't be able to hold them off forever." Without another word, Elias scrambled out of the cockpit and made his way to the weapons bay. He had no experience with space combat, But he wasn't going to just sit idly by while Kel risked his life. He reached the weapons station, and after a few awkward moments of confusion, he activated the ship's forward laser cannons. The weapon system hummed to life, and Elias took aim at the enemy ship, steadying his hands. From the cockpit, Kel maneuvered the Black Talon in tight circles, forcing the scavenger ship to follow every move. The ship rocked under another barrage of plasma fire, and Kel cursed under his breath. They couldn't keep this up for long. "Elias," Kel shouted over the comms. "Take the shot." Elias hesitated. His heart was pounding, his hands slick with sweat. The scavenger ship was closing in, and if he missed, it would mean certain death for both of them. But then he remembered everything they were fighting for: humanity, the galaxy, the lives of countless innocent people. With that thought in his mind, Elias steadied his breath and fired. A powerful laser blast shot forward from the Black Talon, hitting the scavenger ship directly in its engine core. The enemy vessel exploded in a brilliant flash, breaking apart into fiery debris. Elias exhaled in relief, staring at the wreckage. Did we do it? In the cockpit, Kel's deep voice came through the comms. "You did. Now get back here, human. We have bigger problems." Elias quickly returned to the cockpit, his heart still racing. "What do we do now?" Kel's eyes were fixed on the main view screen, where a massive station, dark and imposing, loomed in the distance, the heart of the Void Accord. "We destroy them," Kel said, his voice calm but full of determination. "Once and for all." To be continued. The Black Talon approached the heart of the Void Accord's stronghold, a massive station known only as Eclipse. It floated silently in the dark expanse of space, hidden behind a cluster of asteroids and cosmic dust. Its dark hull was studded with weapon turrets, communication arrays, and heavy shields, all designed to keep prying eyes away. Kelzorek's amber eyes narrowed as the station grew larger on the view screen. The air inside the cockpit was tense, the only sound the hum of the ship's engines. Elias Carter sat beside him, gripping the armrest of his seat, his mind racing with the weight of their mission. "We can't just fly in like this," Elias said quietly, breaking the silence. Kel glanced at him, his expression unreadable. "No, we need to make an entrance." Elias frowned. "A direct assault? We don't have the firepower to take on an entire station." "We don't need to take it all on," Kel replied, his voice low but firm. "We need to find the Void Shard. Once we have it, we can destroy their weapon and stop the Accord. The rest of the station will fall apart on its own." Elias hesitated, unsure of the plan. "And if we fail?" Kel's amber eyes met his, and for the first time, Elias saw a flicker of something. Perhaps the weight of experience, or the cold truth of a warrior who had seen too many battles. "Failure is not an option," Kel said simply, turning back to the controls. "We're already too deep." The Black Talon was now close enough to the station that the dark shadows of Eclipse's outer defenses loomed large in the cockpit. Kel maneuvered the ship carefully, dodging the station's long-range sensors and heavy anti-ship guns. The plan was risky, but their only hope of getting inside undetected was to use the debris field around the station for cover. "We're getting close," Kel muttered, his sharp eyes scanning the station's surface for any sign of patrols. Elias could feel the tension in the air. His hands were sweaty, his heart beating faster with every passing second. They were about to face one of the most dangerous factions in the galaxy, and it was all riding on them. "We should be able to sneak through the outer defenses, but once we're inside, we'll need to move fast," Kel continued. "Stay close and stay quiet." Elias nodded, his mind focused. "Got it." Kel's claws hovered over the controls as he lined up a path through the debris. His ship skillfully weaved in and out of large chunks of metal and rock, avoiding the station's patrol drones that scanned the surrounding space. The tension was unbearable as they silently slipped past each defense, the massive station looming ever closer. Then suddenly, The Black Talon shuddered. "Damn it," Cale cursed, his eyes flashing with alarm. Elias's heart skipped a beat. "What happened?" "We've been detected," Cale said, his voice sharp as he quickly adjusted the ship's trajectory. "Someone's got eyes on us." On the view screen, a small group of Void Accord interceptors appeared, their sleek ships buzzing toward the Black Talon. They were fast, heavily armed, and deadly. Cale swore under his breath. "Prepare for battle." Elias's pulse quickened as the ships closed in. He wasn't a soldier like Cale, but he had trained with weapons before. He quickly headed to the back of the ship, grabbing the pulse blaster from the weapons rack. As the interceptors drew nearer, Cale fired up the ship's main weapons, sending a barrage of plasma shots toward the enemy ships. The Black Talon shook under the impact of the enemy fire, but Cale expertly dodged their shots, returning fire with deadly precision. Elias quickly slid into the secondary weapons station, taking aim at the closest interceptor. His hand shook, but he focused on the target. His first shot missed, but his second hit its mark, causing the enemy ship to explode in a flash of blue light. "One down," Elias muttered to himself. But there were more coming. 2 interceptors remained, and they were fast closing the gap. Cale's face remained set in a grim expression as he expertly evaded their fire, using the debris field for cover while taking shots whenever he could. "Elias, keep up," Cale ordered, his voice like ice. Elias took a deep breath and fired again, this time hitting the second interceptor with a perfect shot. It exploded into pieces, its wreckage spinning off into the void. Cale gave him a brief nod. "Well done." With 2 interceptors down, the third began to retreat, no longer confident in its chances against the Black Talon. Cale didn't hesitate. He fired one last shot, hitting the fleeing ship in its rear thruster. It exploded in a fiery flash, leaving nothing but space debris in its wake. The ship was clear. Cale exhaled, his shoulders relaxing for the first time in what felt like hours. "Good work, human." Elias returned to the cockpit, his hands still shaking. "That was close." "You did well," Cale repeated, his eyes now focused on the station ahead. "But we're not done yet. This was just the first wave. Eclipse is heavily guarded, and the Void Accord will send more ships if they know we're coming." Elias nodded, feeling the weight of Cale's words. There was no turning back now. As the Black Talon approached the docking bay, Cale's voice was steady, filled with resolve. "We go in fast. We go in hard. The Void Shard is waiting." The ship docked, and the hatch opened with a mechanical hiss. The 2 of them stepped into the cold, dimly lit corridors of Eclipse. The station was silent, but a heavy tension hung in the air. They weren't alone. "Stay alert," Cale said quietly. "We're in their territory now." Elias followed closely behind Cale, his pulse still racing. They were at the heart of the Void Accord's power, and there was no telling what awaited them inside. But one thing was certain, they had come too far to fail now. To be continued. The air inside Eclipse was thick with tension. The hum of the station's machinery echoed in the narrow metal hallways as Cal Zorek and Elias Carter moved quietly through the dimly lit corridors. The heavy clang of their boots was the only sound breaking the silence. Elias kept his pulse blaster close, his senses heightened. They were in the heart of the Void Accord's stronghold now, and every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Cale led the way, his sharp eyes scanning every corner, every door, every flicker of movement. He was a predator, and Elias had learned quickly that staying in Cal's shadow was the safest place to be. The alien mercenary had lived for centuries, fought in battles no human could imagine, and survived against enemies that would have torn lesser beings apart. But even Cale seemed cautious now. They reached an intersection, and Cale paused. He turned to Elias, his amber eyes focused. "The Void Shard is ahead. We don't have much time before they know we're here." Elias nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. His hands were clammy, but he steadied his breath. The shard wasn't just a weapon. It was a key to unimaginable power. The void accord would stop at nothing to protect it, and they weren't likely to make it easy for them to escape with it. "Do you have a plan?" Elias asked. Cal's lips twisted into a small, tight smile. "I always have a plan." They continued down the corridor, turning a corner to find a heavily guarded door. 2 void accord soldiers stood in front of it, their energy rifles aimed at the passage. They hadn't seen Cal and Elias yet, but that wouldn't last long. Cal glanced at Elias. "We do this fast and quiet. Get behind them." Elias hesitated for a moment, then nodded. His heart raced as he moved behind Cal, doing his best to make no sound. Cal's movements were fluid, like a shadow in the dark, as he crept toward the soldiers. Elias watched in awe as Cal's hand shot out, his claws wrapping around the first soldier's throat in a blink. The second soldier turned in time to see his comrade fall, but Cal was already upon him, disarming him in a single fluid motion. Within moments, both guards were incapacitated and lying motionless on the floor. Elias exhaled sharply, trying to steady his breathing. That was fast. Cal looked over his shoulder, his expression unchanged. "It's not about speed, human. It's about precision." He moved to the door, pressing a few buttons on the control panel. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing the room beyond. Inside, a large chamber glowed with dim, red light. At the center of the room, resting on a pedestal, was the void shard. The object was small, no larger than a human skull, but its dark energy pulsed like a living thing, sending strange waves through the air. The shard shimmered with an unsettling, unnatural light. It was the heart of the void accord's power, and it had to be destroyed. Elias felt a chill run down his spine as he stepped forward. "Is this it? The shard?" Cal nodded, his eyes locked on the shard. "Yes, and we need to get out of here before they realize we've come for it." But just as Elias reached out to touch the shard, the sound of footsteps echoed through the hallway outside. "Damn it," Cal muttered under his breath. "We've been spotted." Elias's heart pounded as the door slammed shut behind them, and the sound of heavy boots echoed closer. There was no time left. They had to act, or they'd be trapped in the heart of the Void Accord's fortress. Cal turned to Elias, his voice low and urgent. "We can't take the shard and leave through the same way. There's a back exit. Follow me. Stay close." Without waiting for an answer, Cal grabbed the shard from its pedestal and turned toward the far wall. With a sharp motion, he pressed a hidden panel in the wall, revealing a secret passage. Elias followed him into the passage, his mind racing. The weight of the shard in Cal's hands was palpable, and the reality of what they were about to do hit Elias harder than ever. The Void Accord would stop at nothing to keep the shard, and they had to move quickly. The passage was narrow, and Cal moved swiftly, his steps echoing softly in the confined space. Elias struggled to keep up but stayed determined. They didn't have a choice now. There was no turning back. "Are we almost there?" Elias asked, his voice strained. "We're almost there," Cal answered, glancing back for a moment. "But they'll be on our tails soon enough." Elias could feel the tension rising. They had to get to the ship. They had to get out of here before the Void Accord came down on them with everything they had. Suddenly, the passage began to shake as the station's alarm blared, signaling the breach. The walls trembled and lights flickered as if the very foundation of the station was reacting to the presence of the shard. "We're running out of time," Cal said grimly, picking up the pace. Elias's legs burned as they sprinted through the passage, the sound of approaching footsteps growing louder. The station was now in full alert. There was no way they would get away without a fight. They reached the end of the passage, where another door awaited them. Cal smashed a button beside it, and the door slid open, revealing a wide hangar bay. The Black Talon sat waiting, its sleek form a beacon of hope in the dim light. But as they rushed toward the ship, a loud crack echoed through the hangar, and several Void Accord soldiers appeared, blocking their path. "Stop right there," one of them shouted, raising the gun. Cal's eyes narrowed. He had no time for this. Elias, get to the ship. Without another word, Cal lunged at the soldiers, his energy blade drawn in a flash. Elias didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward the Black Talon, his heart pounding as he dove into the cockpit. As the ship's engines roared to life, Elias glanced back. Cal was still fighting, holding the line, but time was running out. "Come on, Cal," Elias yelled, his hands shaking as he prepared the ship for takeoff. Cal darted toward the ship, narrowly avoiding a blast from one of the soldiers. He leaped into the cockpit, and the Black Talon shot out of the hangar, leaving the chaos behind. As they blasted into open space, the Void Accord station began to fade into the distance. They had the shard, but they weren't safe yet. To be continued. The Black Talon shot through the cold emptiness of space, its engines thrumming with power as Cal Zorek and Elias Carter made their escape. Behind them, the Void Accord station slowly shrank into the distance, a dark and silent reminder of the danger they had left behind. The shard they had stolen pulsed with strange energy, its dark power radiating from the small box Cal held in his hands. Elias kept his eyes on the view screen, the stars streaking by as they hurtled toward the edge of known space. The Void Accord wouldn't let them escape without a fight. The weight of the mission pressed down on his shoulders. But there was no time to rest. They had succeeded in stealing the Void Shard, but now the real challenge lay ahead. Destroying the weapon before the Accord could use it to wreak havoc across the galaxy. "We're not out of the woods yet." Cal's voice broke through the silence of the cockpit. Elias glanced over at him. Cal was still clutching the Void Shard, his sharp eyes narrowed in focus. The Mercenary had been through countless battles, but even he knew that their mission wasn't over. The Void Accord would come after them, and they would stop at nothing to reclaim the shard. "We need to destroy it," Elias said, his voice firm, "before they can use it." Cal nodded. "I've been planning this for years. The Accord won't stop until they found us, but we can use their desperation to our advantage. I'll lead them in the wrong direction while you destroy the shard." Elias frowned. "You're going to draw them away. You're not doing this alone." Cal turned his amber eyes toward Elias, his expression unreadable. "You've already done more than I expected. But this is something only I can do. I've fought the Void Accord before, and I know their tactics." Elias wasn't sure he agreed. The bond between them had grown stronger since their journey began, and he didn't want to let Cal face the Accord's wrath alone. But he also understood the gravity of the situation. The shard had to be destroyed. The galaxy's future depended on it. "Be careful," Elias said softly, his voice full of determination. Cal gave him a sharp nod. "Always." The Black Talon veered off course, Cal expertly guiding it through a series of evasive maneuvers. The ship's sensors began to pick up signals. Void Accord ships, in pursuit. They were already closing in, faster than Elias had hoped. Cal didn't flinch as the enemy ships appeared on the radar. His focus remained on his mission. With a flick of his claws, Cal activated the ship's cloaking device, making them nearly invisible to the enemy sensors. The pursuing ships would be forced to rely on visual scanning, a slow and imprecise method, but Cal didn't intend to let them get that close. "We're running low on time," Elias said, his voice tense as the countdown clock on the ship's display ticked down. Cal's eyes flicked to the screen for a moment before returning to the controls. "I'm aware. Get to the back of the ship. I'll need your help to hold off the enemy." Elias nodded, swallowing hard. His palms were clammy, but he moved swiftly to the rear of the ship, where the weapons were stored. He quickly grabbed a pulse rifle and checked the ammo. The ship's shields were holding steady, but he knew it wouldn't last forever. The Void Accord ships would keep coming. He returned to the cockpit. "I'm ready." Cal didn't respond, his hands working quickly at the controls. The Black Talon swerved, dodging a barrage of incoming fire from one of the Void Accord interceptors. The shields flickered under the impact, but they held. For now. Elias watched as Cal executed another sharp turn, throwing their pursuers off their tail. The Black Talon dipped into a low roll, avoiding another volley of fire. "They're persistent," Elias said, his eyes glued to the screens. "Good," Cal replied, his voice steady. "The longer they chase us, the less time they have to find the shard. Just keep those weapons ready." Elias gripped the rifle tighter, but his hands were shaking. The fear wasn't just from the battle. It was from the weight of the shard in the back of his mind. They had to destroy it before it could be used. The Void Accord ships were now closing in, their sensors scanning the area. Cal knew it was only a matter of time before they found the Black Talon's location. He didn't have much time left to draw them away. "Get ready," Cal warned. Without another word, he spun the ship in a sharp arc, heading toward a nearby asteroid field. The smaller ships followed in hot pursuit, their weapons blasting behind them. Cal's mind was sharp, calculating every move. The asteroid field was their last chance to break away, but it was also a risk. Elias braced himself as the ship entered the field, Cal expertly weaving through the floating rocks. The Void Accord ships, unable to match the Black Talon's agility, struggled to keep up. Suddenly, a burst of fire exploded near the ship's left side, shaking the hull. "They're getting too close," Elias yelled, his heart racing. "We need to move faster," Cal growled, pushing the Black Talon into a daring dive. The ship shot through the field, narrowly avoiding collision with a massive asteroid. Behind them, the Void Accord ships were falling behind, their pursuit slowing. Cal's strategy was working, but not for much longer. "We're almost there," Cal said. "Get ready to destroy the shard." Elias gritted his teeth. "I won't fail." He made his way to the back of the ship and approached the small vault where the Void Shard was kept. The shard pulsed in its containment unit, its energy overwhelming. He took a deep breath, pulling the device out and preparing to destroy it. But before he could activate the device, a voice echoed through the comms. "This is the Void Accord," the cold voice said. "You cannot run. You cannot hide. The shard will be ours." Elias felt the weight of the threat in those words. The Accord had never been more determined. But this time, they were wrong. Elias slammed his fist down on the detonator, and a powerful energy pulse erupted from the shard, engulfing the ship. The Black Talon shot forward, the blast sending the pursuing Void Accord ships into chaos. In the distance, the Void Accord station erupted in a massive explosion. The shard's power finally released. Cal and Elias watched from the cockpit as the station crumbled. "We did it," Elias said quietly, relief flooding his chest. Cal gave him a rare, satisfied smile. "Yes, we did." The galaxy had been saved, but their journey was far from over. The end.